Why didn't you just leave? It's a question that I have got. It's a question I know people have all the time when they hear abuse victim stories. Because abuse doesn't happen just once, it happens over and over and over again. So why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you get yourself to safety and remove yourself from that situation? I have found that this question typically comes from one of two places. The first being, things couldn't have really been that bad if you stayed. You're telling me all this, but you must be exaggerating a little bit if you stayed, if you continued being in that situation. And the other place being, why didn't you stand up for yourself and leave? I would have left if I was in your situation. I know deep down the people that are thinking this are not really meaning any disrespect. They're trying to understand. So today I want to address that question of why didn't you leave? Not necessarily just from my point of view, I'll share a little bit about that, but kind of that bigger point of view and picture in general of what's going on and why people don't just leave. Funny enough, I already had this topic in the queue, and there were some things that happened this past week that made it so I felt like this was something that really needed to be addressed. So it was perfect timing. So I'm going to get a little bit into my experience, general experience, and also some of those things that happened this week that made it so I felt this topic really needed to be discussed on this podcast. But before we get into everything, welcome to the He Blamed It On Me podcast. I am your host, Jamie. The He Blamed It On Me podcast is my unfiltered account of living in, leaving, and recovering from a marriage that went from amazing to abusive in a single conversation. Part personal story, part survival guide, this podcast is for survivors, people still in it, and anyone trying to understand emotional abuse better. Let's get into today's topic, which is, why didn't you just leave? This last week was a very big emotional week for me. There were both things that happened in my personal life and things that were talked about in the news, coming across all my social media feeds, that's really triggered me. Just last weekend, so going into the fresh new week, I finally announced to my personal following about Kaylee Collective, letting them know that I am now a certified divorce coach and helping women navigate the process of divorce. With that, I also alerted them to this podcast, and a bunch of people read the snippets that I put on my announcements, went to the webpage, and listened to some podcast episodes. This meant exposing my divorce to people that follow me on social media on the personal side that didn't know I was divorced. It also exposed people to the fact that my relationship turned emotionally abusive and some of the things that went on. For even some of the people who knew my relationship turned abusive, they took time to listen to the podcast and learned things that they didn't actually know about the story because they just had the Cliff Notes version before. This meant a lot of people reached out to me, and one of the things I will say that I am extremely thankful for, everyone was kind. I had prepared myself for people pushing back, for people asking, why are you sharing this? This is personal. No one wants to see this. Don't talk about your ex in that way. I got a lot of positive feedback and a lot of people reaching out, congratulating me and letting me know that they were there for me. One of the themes that came up in a lot of it was people couldn't believe what I went through. And not that they didn't believe it in terms of they thought I was lying or fabricating things, but that I went through this. Because there was a lot of people who knew me during this time period, who saw me out at events and interacted me with this time period, who never knew what was going on behind the curtain, who never had any thought cross their minds that my life had turned upside down and was pure chaos. One of the things I started picking up in a lot of the comments from multiple people, and a lot of these were the private comments, were that what I've shared so far, they thought was the story. And here's one of the things about this and why I'm turning this into a podcast. What I've shared so far on these episodes is less than 4 months of a 2-year journey before I moved out. And then it has been about a little bit over 2 years, just shy of 2.5 years since I moved out. And the story continues during a lot of that time as well. What I shared is the tip of the iceberg. We are in the warm-up of the journey, which means it gets worse. But this is only the start of the story. And when people hear that, when I've shared that over this last week, the next question is typically, why? Why did I stay? How did I let this continue? They're like, how did you live through this? How did you allow this to happen? And once again, I think we're some of those things when we say allowed to happen, they're not necessarily looking at it like victim blaming in some ways, but why did you stay? Why did you allow this to continue on instead of moving out? Especially someone like me, who has always been known in my circle as a very independent woman, even within my marriage, that I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself, that I have spoken up for myself multiple times throughout my life and have never let anyone disrespect me in this regards. So when they're looking at it and asking that question of how did I stay? How did I allow this to happen? They're looking at it as the Jamie we know should have never put up with this. In some ways, they're right. I shouldn't have, but I did. And that's really what I want to dive into next. For me personally, and why I stayed, a lot of times boils down to the fact that we had 15 wonderful years leading up to this. For anyone who saw us as a couple and thought we were a great couple who got along and all that stuff, we were not putting on a show in public and then coming home and being completely different people to each other. The good couple that you saw in public was the good couple that happened behind the scenes. I can count the number of fights we had in those first 15 years where we really didn't get along and, things were said that probably shouldn't have been said and we were angry. I can count the number of times on one hand. We got along. We had a good relationship where we saw eye to eye on so many things. This was not a relationship for 15 years where we were struggling and fighting to push things through. I know all relationships are different and everything, but one of the things that we would always say is people are like, oh, marriage is hard. You got to really work for it. And we would always sit there like, what is hard? When you find the right person, marriage isn't hard. This is the easiest thing because we found someone that we connected with. Was our relationship perfect? No. But the things that weren't perfect were things that we could overlook. There might be this habit that he had that drove me up the wall, but there was habits that I had that drove him up the wall, and we could deal with them because everything else was good. We had 15 years of good. And why am I going to walk away from that? Because now all of a sudden we're having a tough time. Because marriages go through tough times. But then there was also the gaslighting that I talked about in one of the previous episodes. And the gaslighting was real and fast to the point that I was doubting my reality about how healthy our relationship was. And I was being made to believe that the problems in the relationship were being caused by me and I had the power to fix them. So here I was having a relationship that I loved, that I really wanted to get back. And I was being told that I was to blame for the bad parts that we are in right now and that I could fix it. So if I wanted those good years back, if I wanted that relationship back from when we got along all the time and I had the power to fix it, why wouldn't I step up to the plate and fix it? You don't walk away from something just because you're having a tough time. You put the time and effort in to fix it. And in hindsight, was that the right thing to do? Well, I still honestly believe at this point in time, yes. Was gaslighting bad? Absolutely. But I wanted to fix the relationship because I wasn't ready to throw things away 15 wonderful years away because we were having a hard time. Which brings us to the next thing. My husband was having a mental health breakdown. You don't abandon someone you love because they're going through a hard time. And if you would, I question whether you really love that person. So you stand by someone's side, even when they're angry, even when they're saying bad things, because you know that's not them. That was never my husband. Internally, I was battling all the questions. Is this really my fault? Can I really fix this? What can I do to save the relationship that I love? I wasn't ready to give up on my marriage. But here's the other thing. I was being made to believe that it was my fault if our marriage didn't survive. Not his because of his behavior, but it'd be my fault because I didn't work hard enough. One of the things I want to point out is at this point in time, as I'm going through this story, so we're about 4 months in, the word abuse had never crossed my mind. It was 9 months into everything before I stumbled across something that made me realize the relationship was abusive. And I will be upfront and honest right now. I tried my hardest to make it so it wasn't true, meaning I must be misinterpreting things. And it was true. It was abusive, but I didn't want to believe it. And at this point in time, abuse had never even crossed my mind. So yes, later, I was kind of mad at myself. I am disappointed sometimes in hindsight, looking back of what I could have done and what I should have done. But at this moment in time, and what happens to a lot of victims, until they get to the point where they do actually leave, leaving isn't an option because they don't see it as an option, because they're too close. They really don't see it as bad as it really is when they are living in it day to day and really just trying to survive. But then here's the other thing. There were the outside factors that make it so people don't just leave. Here's some of the voices I was hearing. It's not really that bad. He's just going through a hard time. If you didn't let a guy hit on you, none of this would have happened, so it's your fault. People also refused flat out to talk to me about it. When I started opening up about things, I could tell in conversations that people would shut down. They wouldn't ask me any questions. They wouldn't follow up later to see how I was doing. There was one particular friend that I was very honest with early on. Told them about the abuse. And when I told them, I said, here is my action plan. Here is what has to happen in my relationship in order for me to stay. Here is what I need to be held accountable for so I don't slip up and I don't stay for the wrong reasons. When you see me, can you just ask me the question of, how is everything going? They never did. This is a person that I trusted to tell about the abuse, and they just didn't want to talk about it. It was uncomfortable for them. Hearing the stories made people shut down. And so the people who knew never asked. It made me believe that, well, if they're not asking about it, it must not be that bad. So if no one's asking about it, no one's caring about it, is it really that big a deal? I'm just overreacting, right? Overall, people didn't act like I should leave. Directly and indirectly, I was told that I had the power to fix things. I was told that I was breaking up my family if I left. I was told that it was my fault and my effort that mattered, not his. I was told this by therapists. I was told this by loved ones. I was told this by friends that I just needed to work harder. I just needed to forgive him. I just needed to communicate better when he was the one abusing me. So people didn't act like I should leave, and they directly and indirectly told me I was the one who had the power to fix everything. In the story, there is a time period that we are separated. Very few people knew that we were separated, but those who did knew about the abuse. We ended up getting back together, and all this will come later in the story. And one of the things I heard was, we're so happy that you guys worked things out. We're so happy that you all are back together. And this left me crushed. Because inside, I was dying. Inside, I was regretting every day that I let this man back in the house. Inside, every day, I was trying to think of, how do I protect myself? How do I stay safe? And people were congratulating me for fixing my marriage. Because once again, it was coming off to me that that's what made other people happy, was my fixed marriage, and that they didn't care about what I was going through as an individual. No one ever asked the question, are things better? No one. Not one person ever asked if things were better and if that's why we were back together. So one of the reasons I didn't leave, that I also know is a reason why so many other people don't leave, is because I was told that I was the failure if I left. Once again, I was the failure if my marriage fell apart. If we divorced, it would be all on me. It was my responsibility to get my husband to stop abusing me, and that's what society wanted. Me to get my husband to stop abusing me, not for my husband to stop abusing me or me to leave and bring myself to safety. But staying didn't mean that I was safe. I stayed because I thought it was the best choice. I stayed because I thought I could save my marriage. I stayed because I thought other people would be proud of me for staying, and therefore, if I saved my marriage, I could be proud of myself. But I wasn't safe. So safety was a priority for me. And that was the one thing I know a lot of abuse victims focus on, is they don't think they can leave. They sometimes don't see the need for them to leave. And their brain transitions to safety. And I know from an outsider's perspective, you're like, well, Jamie, if you want to be safe, why are you staying in an unsafe situation? But here's the thing. When you are in an abusive relationship, you have to evaluate every day, what is the safest option? When I was in the marital home, every day I was evaluating everything I did and say to see whether I would be safe or not, whether that was the safest option or not. Everything I said and did was being judged by my husband. My relationship was every day me trying to be the perfect wife and me striving to hit that checklist of what he was defining as the perfect wife. The problem was that checklist was changing every day and I had no idea what was on it. So I had to act my best every day, and there was no love bombing, which looking back is probably worse because I stayed for 2 years without feeling any love, any affection from him in positive ways. Some days I would be rewarded for being the perfect wife that day, but it was different than feeling like he loved me and he was changing and he had the capacity to be good. Maybe that's why I only stayed 2 years in it, because a lot of abuse victims stay way longer in abusive relationships because it goes through that cycle of love bombing, which is a manipulation thing makes them think of, this is good. Why am I going to walk away from this man who loves me when he simply made a mistake yesterday? Personally, I thought I was working towards the light at the end of the tunnel that would be my good, happy marriage back. If I had known that the light at the end of the tunnel was a divorce, I wouldn't have put in so much effort. But I can also say, I don't know where the line is that would have changed this, but if I didn't put in a lot of the effort that I did, I think I would have always wondered, could I have done more? I had to reach the point of understanding that I couldn't do anything more. And that's what happens to a lot of abuse victims. We have to reach the point where we recognize that we do not have the power to fix things. We do not have the power to change things. But early on, why do we stay? It's because we think we do. It's because we're told that we do. Our abuser tells us that it's our fault. Our abuser tells us that we have the power to fix things. And because we love them, we believe them. And we want to save our marriages, so we do put in the effort. It takes a long time and a lot of things for us to recognize that we don't actually have that power. Their behavior is not in our control. I worked so hard because that's what society was telling me to do. Society was telling me that I was giving up on my family if I left. I was the bad person if I left. They all overlooked the fact that leaving was the only way to save myself. It really is hard for even me to comprehend how bad things had to get before I was willing to save myself. There are 2 things that are happening right now in the news that, as I mentioned, kind of triggered me this week. I will say these two things. I just want to briefly talk about them and why they triggered me, but I will put this caveat out there. There's a lot of facts about both of them that I am not getting into, because this is not about the facts and what is true and what is not true about these situations. But I do want to talk about them because they are things that well, I'm not going to say kind of, they are things that triggered me this week and relate to why didn't she just leave? So the first one is the Max Miller situation. So for those of you who don't know what that situation is, his ex is accusing him of abusing her and their child. He is coming out defending himself, and one of the excuses that he's given for this not to be true was that she offered to cook him dinner and invited him to meet up with them at a park. And if she was scared of him, and if he abused her, she wouldn't do those things. So here's why this triggered me. I know what it's like to have to weigh your safety and do things with your abuser because it's the safer option. And I know that's hard for people to comprehend. You would sit there and say, isn't not being around your abuser at all safer? In the big picture, yes. But in those moments, sometimes you have to make decisions because you need to be around them anyway. You need to make decisions because you're weighing the repercussions of what happens next. So one of the things that happened in my story was after I moved out, my ex asked me if he could take me out on a date for my birthday. I didn't want to go, but we were, at this point in time, hadn't even really uttered the word divorce. It was pretty obvious that we were heading towards divorce. I knew 100%. Once we got through the holidays, I was starting the divorce process, that I was not staying married to this man. But I had to weigh what would happen if I said no. So I said yes. Because me sacrificing myself to go on a date night with the man that I am leaving and eventually going to be divorcing was the safer option than saying no. Luckily, that date never ended up happening, and that's a story for another day. But in that moment, me saying yes to a date I did not want to go on was safer than me saying no. My ex and I shared 2 kids. There are plenty of times I have to show up as my stomach is in knots, that if someone even probably speaks to me wrong that entire day, I am just going to burst into tears because I am on the edge of every type of emotion that you can imagine an abuse victim going through. But I still have to show up at events and stand by my ex so we can support our children together. It's not fun, but sometimes when you are co-parenting, you have to put yourself in those situations in order to be there for your children. So when we look at these things and we're saying, why didn't she leave? And why was she still around them? And why did she say yes? It is because we have to evaluate everything to see what is safest for us to do. The other thing that's in the news is a very different situation. The Lindsay Clancy trial is going on right now. And I will 100% admit, I do not know a lot of facts about this just because of what I heard triggered me, and it involves death of children. So I do not have it in me to follow the case closely, look at details, anything like that. But for once again, if you happen to not know about this case, it was a mother who killed her children. And I believe she confessed to killing the children. And she was experiencing, I believe it was extreme postpartum depression. And the thing that really triggered me about it was the fact that she, from what I've heard, was desperately trying to get help. That she knew things weren't right. That she knew she needed more help and support. And she was trying to get it. And in some ways she was dismissed, and other ways, like, I think her case, from what I'm hearing, once again, I don't have all the facts, that she wasn't getting the support. She was not getting the support. And one of the things that she wasn't getting was the proper support from her husband. Once again, this is what I'm taking away from what I heard. There might be facts that prove otherwise. And that's not the point that I'm getting into today. The reason why that triggered me is I know exactly what that's like. So as I mentioned, in hindsight, it is shocking how bad things had to get before I recognized that it was time to leave. And one of the things that happened to me was realizing that I would never get the support I needed from my husband, even though I was expected to give everything to him in terms of support. So this was shortly before I left. I was struggling. He was drowning me with his mental health struggles. He was drowning me with the emotional abuse. The Jamie that walked out of the house the day I left was a Jamie that had never existed before and doesn't exist again. I was at the lowest of the low of where I could be on, or where I've ever been on my mental health and emotional journey. He was destroying me. And one of the ways that showed up was the type of mother I was. I could recognize that I was no longer what I defined as a good mother. I was snapping at my children. I was struggling I would do it, but I was struggling to meet the basic needs. Everything felt like a chore. Things that I used to be like, oh, that's no big deal. I get it done in 30 seconds. We're now sitting on the to-do list. I felt like I couldn't get through certain days. I felt like I wasn't the mother that I had ever been, the mother that I wanted to be, or the mother I felt like my children deserved. And I hated it. It was one of those things, like, in the moment, I knew I couldn't do anything differently, but there was still that part of me that remembered who I used to be, and I hated this place that I was in. Absolutely hated it. And one day, I asked my children to do something. They didn't, in typical children's style, and I snapped. I yelled at them, and I shouldn't have yelled at them. I know that. I knew that then. My husband looked at me and said, the children don't deserve to be yelled at. You can talk to them calmer, and things like that. Like, I think he said some other things too. And I just remember sitting there and being like, this is exactly how you treat me. You snap at me for things. You yell at me all the time because you refuse to have a conversation. But now you're on me because I treated the children exactly like how you treated me. But I didn't say that. Instead, I sat there and I broke down and I said, I know the girls didn't deserve to get yelled at. I know that I am not acting like the mother that they deserve right now. I am struggling. I need help. Will you help me? I need help. I need help so I'm not struggling. I need help. I need help. I need help. And I was begging for him to help me. I was begging for him to get me support or get me through this or do something, because I wasn't who I had ever been before, and I hated myself for it. And I was drowning in everything that he was putting out there. And he looked at me like I was a crazy, strange woman on the street that he didn't know, who was babbling in incoherent sentences. He didn't offer me any help. He didn't show up for me in any way. He didn't see how he could take some of the mental load or even physical load off my to-do list. He simply told me I needed to figure it out. And for me, that's when I recognized that I was never going to get the support I needed from my husband, and I needed to leave. But that's how bad it got, that I'm in tears begging for help. And the person who claims he loves me, the person who's been telling people over and over again since I left that he is the broken-hearted husband whose wife left him and he would do anything to get me back, sat there and looked at me like I was crazy. And that I needed just to get my shit together, and I needed to do it all on my own. And so when we ask people why they didn't just leave, we're too close to it. Every abuse victim that I talk to has that moment where it's, nope, this is it. I am not going back. This is it. I am leaving. And even when that day comes, it's not like they can just pack up and go. Things still need to happen. Typically, sometimes it's a series of those days. It was a series of those days for me. At that point in time, I knew I needed to leave, but leaving wasn't simple. And I come from a place of privilege. I had access to all our finances, so a financial burden of finding a place to stay and being able to afford it was not something that was stopping me from leaving. I had a huge family network that I knew, even though they didn't really give me the support I needed up to that point in time to encourage me to leave, that I could turn to at any moment and say, hey, I need to stay at your house, which I eventually did. I had the ability to leave easily and safely compared to other people's stories, and it was still so difficult to leave. I literally needed to be pushed down to rock bottom in order to recognize that I didn't have the power to fix things. If you've ever thought this question when you've heard someone else's story, or you're looking back at your own journey and saying, why didn't I just leave? Why don't I just leave? Just remember, that question is easy to ask. Hindsight is always 20/20. You look back at someone's story, you hear someone's story, you look back at your own story, and you are going to see a lot of times that this should have been the sign that you should have walked away. But it's not that easy. Society pressures us to stay. Society tells the abuse victim that they didn't do the right things, they didn't try hard enough if they leave. Abuse victims carry the weight of the abuse because society puts the weight on their shoulders. If you've ever asked this question about someone else's story, or even your own, my advice to you is just stop. Don't ask it. Let me tell you, they wish they would have left sooner. They wish everything that made them stay didn't happen. Nobody wants to stay in an abusive relationship. They are just thinking that if they keep working hard enough, the abuse will stop. And if this was you and you're wondering, why did you stay? Give yourself some grace. Stop feeling guilty. You did the best you thought you could do in the situation. You looked at each one of those moments and you thought, what will make me the safest? What is the right thing to do? And in hindsight, those things could all look like mistakes. But in the moment, you made the decision you were capable of making. You were way too close to see the big picture. And let me tell you, it really does suck when you're on the other side and you're looking back at this big picture and you're just like, how did I live through that? But the important thing to remember is you cannot change the past, but you can take the information that you now have and move forward. So stop judging yourself and others with the question, why did you stay? Instead, support people where they are and help them move forward.